Hey, in this tutorial, we're going to be painting 10 easy landscape elements that you can add to your landscape paintings, everything from rocks to trees to mountains, bodies of water. It's going to be really fun. I hope you love it. I know you're going to love it, and stick to the end because I do a fun way to paint some water and waves on water that I know you're going to love. So let's dive in. All right, so we are going to be painting 10 easy landscape illustrations. So these are going to be like filler elements or trees and mountains, things that you're going to be using in your landscapes. I'm going to start off with some rocks. So when we think rocks, a lot of people think gray. So we mix gray with black and water, but there are so many different versions of gray. There's also rocks that aren't gray or more brown. So obviously this is going to be different per landscape, but I'm just going to do a simple brownish gray. So burnt umber and Mars black. And then I'm going to bring it into a cleanish area of my mixing well. And I'm going to start with a really light version of that color. So I've got the pigment on my brush, my size 6 brush, and then I'm going to wash some of it off in my cup and use a lot of water. And I'm going to be more expressive with this because I want some texture on my rock. So I want some texture from the hair of my brush and the paper poking through. So I'm going to hold my brush a little bit higher than normal. And I'm just going to paint in an oval. And I want to leave this gap of white space here, or this, texture of the paper showing through, to show like a little shine on the rock. Maybe it's a smoother rock that you would find next to a pond. Maybe it's a little bit wet. And using wet and wet technique, I'm going to grab a darker version of that pigment and just go right up on the bottom edge of that rock. And add in some of that shadow color. I want to help it blend a little bit smoother, so I'm going to grab my dry brush. So I'm just dried off my brush and bringing that in as a smooth blend. So my darkest part is going to be that bottom edge of my rock. Then we go from midtones to highlights. Let's do another rock right next to it, but maybe it's got a touch of a clay color to it. So I'm going to grab some Scarlet Lake, Opera Rose, Yellow Ochre, and black. And we're going to do the same thing, expressive strokes. So I'm further up the handle of my brush. And this time I started with my darkest value for the outline, and I kind of added a thicker stroke over here. And then I'm just going to grab water, but make sure my brush isn't too damp before I go over here. And we're going to pull that pigment. This is another way of using wet and wet painting through pulling instead of pushing like we did over here. If you don't really know how to use wet and wet painting, I've got a good tutorial for you that goes through all the different methods painting wet and wet. We'll link to it. But making sure that bottom curve or edge of the rock is darkest, and then it's fading and getting lighter. There's our cutie rocks. All right, so next I'm gonna paint a simple evergreen tree. I'm gonna start with a lighter green. I've got sap green and a touch of lemon yellow deep in this mixture. So with more water on my brush than pigment, or in the mixture, not on my brush. You don't want too much water on your brush. And I'm just going to use the tip of my brush and kind of dance around. The technique, there's no like fancy terms or method to the madness. I'm literally just creating these bushy things.
I think those are called branches.
Well, sure, but I'm talking about the actual stroke.
Oh, right.
They're starting darker and fading to a lighter green as I'm going, and also pointing downwards more for this evergreen tree. And then when that dries, I'm going to go back over some of those branches or the green leafy areas to add a darker pigment. And those gaps of white space can be snow, they can be where you fill in with more branches, etc. I'm going to grab some burnt umber and a touch of Mars Black for the trunk of my tree. So for your tree elements, whatever type of tree you're painting, the further away your details in a landscape painting are going to be, the lighter they will be in the painting. So generally speaking, elements in the background are going to be faded and harder for your eyes to see. So you can have a lot of layers to your trees if you play on values. I'm going to come back to that tree and add more detail to it, but we're going to move on to our cypress tree next, which I'm going to start with more of a yellow-green base. So I'm going to grab sap green and lemon yellow deep and a touch of water. I'm going to use about a 35-degree hold on my brush, and the overall shape of the longer cypress trees is this oval kind of shape. And I'm bringing in some water. Might leave some texture here and there of the paper showing through. And then while that's still wet, I'm going to grab a darker yellow-green. So a little bit more sap green on my brush. And I'm going to go over this left side to use wet and wet to darken some of those leaves. And then with a dry brush, I'm going to help that blend a little bit better. Reminds me of Italy. And then we got our trunk. Now let's say we're doing an ocean landscape. I'm gonna do a really dark green, kind of like it's maybe darker nighttime landscape for our ocean landscape, or these trees are in our background. So I'm gonna start, and I'm gonna use the same black and green mixture, sap green and black, for my whole palm tree. This is more of a expressive way of painting a tree. So I'm using just the tip of my brush. Each one of these palm frondies are going to come back to that main trunk area. Basically just using the tip of my brush for this whole palm tree. This is my size 6 brush, just flicking it. So if this was like more in the foreground of my ocean landscape painting and maybe more daylight, I would want to add more color and more detail to this because we'd be seeing it more clearly. But this is a great way to paint a palm tree in the background of your landscape. But similar to this cypress tree up here, if I wanted it to be more vibrant and full of detail, then I would add more color. The trunk would be, you know, burnt umber and yellow ochre, and the leaves would be more green. but adding black to your elements, darkening your elements, is a great way to push them into the background of your painting. And if I were to lighten this color, then it would even go further into the background. Next, let's paint some easy wildflowers. So I'm gonna grab some sap green. Let's say we were gonna be painting some grass in the foreground of our landscape. Just kind of being expressive with my strokes here and these zigzags using sap green and some yellow green. And this is like, picture a wildflower field with maybe a house in the background or some mountains. We're not up close on these wildflowers. I'm gonna grab some Opera Rose, some yellow, lemon yellow deep. I'm just going to add little bits of warm colors here and there as nods to that wildflower field. Maybe even some cobalt blue for bluebonnets or bachelor buttons. I have a full tutorial on how to paint loose style wildflowers that we'll link to so you can see that. That's a fun way to paint wildflowers more up close. And if you're doing some sort of field, here's a really easy way to do that. For our tall grass, let's picture, I'm gonna paint in the foreground of, let's say, like a field. So we're gonna have our background here. That's just a color gradient. So I'm getting from yellow green to a darker green in my landscape. I'm gonna wait for this to dry and then I'm going to paint my grass on top of that when it dries. So next I'm gonna do some watercolor mountains. These are very simple mountains that can be in the background of your landscape painting, kind of like faded in the distance. I'm using my size 6 brush, mixed up a Prussian blue with Mars black mixture and a lot of water. And I'm basically just taking a 25-degree hold with my brush. So my brush is about 25 degrees away from the paper. And I'm putting pressure and dragging the side of my brush along like so. And grabbing that and moving along. I'm kind of just grabbing that right edge and zigging like a Z. And then with wet and wet painting, I'll go back in and darken, leaving some areas that aren't dark to show the ridges and the shelves or edges of the mountain because they're not totally smooth. And anytime I want a smoother blend, I'm just grabbing my dry brush and helping it out a little. Montañas. Now, clouds are going to be actually kind of similar to our mountains a little bit. We're painting around the cloud. We're painting the space around the cloud. And I'm going to start with a light blue-gray. So I've got Prussian blue, a touch of cobalt blue and some Mars black. And I'm going to use my brush really flat, so like 25 degrees away from my paper. And I'm going to just let the texture of the paper poke through the hairs of my brush. Grab some more water. And that texture, the paper texture, because I was so flat with my brush dragging it across, it split the hairs of the brush and allowed for the texture in the paper to poke through, which is an amazing fluffy cloud texture. And then I'm going to go back in and add a darker blue to the bottom edge of this cloud so you can really see it pop. So while this is still wet, we're just going in. Maybe up here too, but not too much on the top. And I want that gradient to be more blended, so I've got my dry brush and I'm pulling that color into the rest of the background over here, and same thing down here. Just blending it in. There's a cute little cloud. So if you're painting an actual full landscape, you're gonna be doing bigger brush strokes. But be careful around that full sky when you're just doing your washes to leave some gaps of white space and texture when you drag your brush so you get that fun cloudy texture. Next, something you might see in more of your desert landscapes, cacti. For doing some cactus in the background, let's say we're getting darker towards the, mountainscapes in the distance. Maybe we're in Joshua Tree or something. So I'm going to use more of a dark green with Mars Black and sap green. And using the side of my brush at about a 35-degree angle hold, I'm just going to pull out little saguaro, however you say that, cacti. That would look real nice in the background of our landscape. And again, the lighter you get with all of your elements, the further away they seem, or more in the distance. Put this on top of a clay color, yellow ochreish color for your desert floor, and you've got yourself a landscape. Obviously not as detailed as if I was painting the full landscape, but there you go. Last but not least, we're gonna paint some water. So this could be your ocean, a pond, or a lake in a mountain scene, wherever you'd see some water. I'm going to grab my lightest blue mixture. So you could do Prussian blue and black, but with a lot of water, and then keep adding more pigment to the mixture, blue and black, to make it darker. You could do more of a turquoise blue for ocean, just kind of depends on the vibe and the actual where this water would live. So I'm gonna do more of a dark, misty ocean vibe, let's say. And I'm just gonna make this, I'm actually gonna use my size 16 brush since we have this much area. So I've got a lot of water in my dark blue-gray mixture. And I'm going to start light. And as I work my way down this ocean area, I'm going to add more pigment. So we're getting darker and darker in value as we get closer to the shore. So we've got a nice gradient. If you need to smoothen out the area, some area, make it more subtle of a transition, just grab some water and pull it around. I'm gonna wait for that to dry, and then I'll add some simple wave detail to that. But while I wait for that to dry, I'm gonna grab my size 6 brush again, and I'm gonna add in some darker leaves to my evergreen tree using Mars Black and Sap Green. If you avoid a lot of these white space areas, it's gonna look more snowy, just so you know. So if you don't want that, if you want it to be more of a summer vibe, then obviously fill in those gaps a little more with a lighter green. But we can make this a more snowy vibe. Snow-capped branches if we wanted to, if we leave it. I'm just kind of expressively dancing on top of the lighter green. Having my darkest areas on the left side versus the right to show more of a shadow side on the right side. If you are doing snow, picture that edge of the snow bundle on top of your branches being where you need to put your darkest color, because that's where it would overhang and you would need the shadow. So same thing as I mentioned with the saguaro cactus and all of the trees. If you want them to be further in the background, you get lighter, maybe even a little bit more black in hue to appear further away. And then the closer a tree is, the more detailed it's gonna look, the more vibrant in color it's gonna look. You can see the brown of the trunk better, or the branches. I'm gonna make this a little longer. Etc. And if you wanted trees in the background, you would fade and get more muted. So same thing with the cypress tree. I'm gonna go in with sap green and add some leaf dots. Just dancing around. Adding more dots closer together on the left side of the tree. And then as I get toward the center, I'm gonna do a little bit darker. As I get toward the center of the tree, I'm gonna space out my dots a little bit more and fade. So I'm gonna start lightening that green and doing less dots. Dots, dots, dots. And again, if this tree was in the background of my painting, we wouldn't see much detail. So we would just have that base layer that we laid down before adding the dots, and that would probably be it. Okay, now let's add our tall grass. Pretty simple here, but I'm grabbing a darker green to layer on top and adding in these C curves. Some thinner than others, some shorter than others. Maybe we have a flowing field, think Van Gogh-esque, where not every section of grass is curving in the same direction. It's got more movement to it, like a field. Maybe you've got some cross-hatching happening, overlapping. Oh, Van Gogh, my troubled soul. Grassy. Okay, so for ripples or waves on our water, body of water, whatever type of body of water it is, we're gonna add in these Z's, 2 values of our darker blue. So I'm grabbing Prussian blue, and I'm adding to this base mixture that we had that was blue and Mars black. And I'm just making it darker by adding more pigment. So I'm grabbing Prussian blue and Mars black to darken what I already have. And I am going to use a 25 to 30 degree angle on my size 6 round brush and add in some basically mountains. Some of them zig back and forth like Z's. Some of them connect. But as we get higher up this blue gradient, we're getting smaller with our waves and lighter in value. So some strokes are thicker than others. And I'm getting gradually lighter and smaller. And before I move any higher, I'm just going to grab water and pull that down a little bit to blend. So this is like middle of the ocean waves are happening, or you could have a view of a body of water where it's just not a very still body of water, and you're seeing more of the middle of the pond or the lake getting lighter and smaller and more sparse. And then going back with a little water and blending those in a little bit, pulling that shadow down. And then grabbing an even darker, thicker mixture of our dark blue. So adding more Mars black, and we're really gonna make those waves pop. So I'm gonna go over some of these edges, and especially the ones in the foreground, to darken them. They're closer to me. I see more of the shadow than the ones in the background. I'm getting lighter. But first I'm gonna help these blend a little bit with water, but not going too much into my highlight layer, which was just the base layer we started with. Painting waves like this does take patience, but the payoff is worth it. And you're just building layer on layer.
Like middle of the ocean, stranded in the middle of the ocean.
I would not want to be stranded in the middle of the ocean.
It sounds like worst case scenario.
For sure.
Oh, terrifying.
I do have a friend who was shipwrecked once.
What?
Yeah.
What? How do I not know this?
Well, I'm not I haven't met her in person. We're Instagram friends.
Oh.
But we are actually friends. We've talked on the phone before.
Stranded though?
Mm-hmm.
Like floating.
Yeah. She lives in, what's it called? Tasmania?
Yeah.
And off Australia. And
What?
she's really cool, but she, I guess, was sailing and got shipwrecked.
Oh my gosh. That's literally one of the most terrifying things I think can happen to a human.
And she was by herself.
Oh, she just got found.
I don't know what happened, actually. I forget the rest of the story.
I need the rest of the story. Obviously. You message her.
Yeah.
That is insane.
She's posted about the story on her Instagram.
Do you want to share?
Captain's Rest is her Instagram.
And she was shipwrecked.
Uh-huh.
That's so scary.
Okay, so we could mess all day if we wanted to, but the last little thing I'm going to do is actually use white gouache. I use designer's gouache in permanent white from Winsor & Newton. This is a random old jar that I had that I mixed the white gouache in here, and I just added some water to it to make it a little less thick. But I'm going to use my size 2. Grab some of that, size 2 brush. We're just adding little foamy parts to some of these waves. Great way to do highlights. If you don't have masking fluid, I'm just kind of dancing around, picking up lighter spots with my brush. Not too much back here, because again, we're fading into the distance. So there you have it, 10 cute, 10 easy watercolor illustrations for your landscapes. We do have basically every tutorial you would need for these types of like we have a tree tutorial, we have a wildflower tutorial, a mountain tutorial, a few different landscape ones. Do we have a desert one?
Yes.
A desert tutorial. So make sure you check out all those tutorials. We'll link them in this video so you can check them out along with all of my supplies. These are different elements that you can include in your next watercolor landscape. So I hope that was helpful in you seeing those different techniques and how to paint clouds and rocks, trees and waves, mountains, all of that good stuff. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial. I hope that was helpful. It's just a good thing to practice little elements, little illustrations of a bigger landscape so you can always be mixing it up, always be challenging yourself. I hope that was helpful for you. Make sure you comment below with what was your favorite illustration to paint, or maybe your least favorite or most challenging illustration to paint. I would love to know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications. That just helps us boost this channel, all the work that we put into putting together these tutorials. And it also makes sure that you don't miss a future tutorial because you'll get notified. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.